Well, good morning and welcome to our online webinar, God's Call at a Time of COVID-19. My name is Robbie Morrison. I am a mission development worker for the Church of Scotland, based here in Glasgow, and we are delighted to have with us this morning Martin Fair through in Edinburgh, Michael Harvey based down in Manchester, and Paul Haringman up in Inverness. And so this morning, the three of them are going to be looking at how do we discern God's call during this time of COVID-19, where we find our churches on lockdown, with many of the doors to the churches still shut, and church online, and many of us in lockdown. If you live in the Glasgow area, a fresh batch of restrictions for the next week at least. But in the midst of this, a reminder that God has not been furloughed, that God is not taking time out right now, that he is still very much at work in this country, in our lives, and in the lives of those around us. So how do we understand that? How do we hear from God and connect with those around us? So I'm going to pass over to our moderator, Martin Fair, and he will take it from there.
Thank you, Robbie, and thank you for your initiative in putting today together. Folks, I wonder if I might just begin by telling you what happened earlier this morning. As Robbie was saying, I'm in Edinburgh right now, and as you know, probably it's a very cosmopolitan city. So there I was outside, and right past me goes a carriage. I know, not the kind of thing you see ordinarily, but there's a carriage going by, and I could see in just about here, and lo and behold, there was an Ethiopian in the carriage going by. Well, this is Edinburgh, as I say, it's a very cosmopolitan city. Anything's possible, and you learn to be surprised by nothing. But as he was going by, I just about heard him speaking over the noise of the horse's hoofs clipping along the cobbled stones and the carriage wheels. And I was sure I heard him reading words from scripture, which was intriguing, isn't it? In our day and age, that people might be reading the Bible and be considering what's the content of those pages. So I was going to go over and chat with the guy almost as he was going past, but I didn't. I mean, you'll understand why, of course. As the moderator of the General Assembly, I've got more than enough on my plate, thanks very much. My diary is full of Zoom engagements and Teams conferences and such like, so I just don't have time. And the other thing was this, I mean, what right have I got to go butting into this guy's life? This Ethiopian going past? I mean, it's up to him what he does with his time. It's his own private world. Why would I have any engagement with him or any right to butt into his situation? So I thought I'm just going to leave it be. And then thirdly, and if I'm honest with you, most importantly, I was kind of reluctant to go up in case the guy just brushed me off. Maybe said he wasn't interested in me or what I was going to talk about. I was kind of scared about that in some ways because, well, none of us likes to be rebuffed, do we? Or given the blank hand. So with all those things considered, I just let that Ethiopian guy in his carriage go on. I wonder what you would have done this morning in your village, your town, your city, wherever you're coming from today, joining us in this conference. I wonder what you would have done as the Ethiopian went past. To begin our day, shall we bow our heads and shall we pray? Loving God, we thank you for the new day, with all of its promise and possibility, knowing in advance that you will provide for our needs, that you will bless us in ways perhaps as yet unknown, and yet sure nonetheless. For you are faithful through every day and through every generation. There is no shadow of turning with you, loving Lord. And so we worship you this day. We praise you as you alone deserve, and we give you thanks for your goodness. We pray for the church in this day. Lord, very conscious that what has been is disappearing in our rear view mirrors, and yet we are far from certain about what lies ahead. And so we acknowledge our dependence on you and cry out to you that you would grant us the gift of your Spirit to lead us forward, that we might become individually and collectively as the church all the more what you need us to be in these days. So come, we pray, be present to us in our webinar this morning. Speak to us, for we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, once more, maybe some of you were just a little late to the party and may be joining us now. Let me welcome you to this morning's webinar. It's great, isn't it? We can do these events without the normal practicalities involved. You would have to think about travelling to the venue, have to think about, well, when you would have to leave, where you were going to get the bus or the train. No, you're right there in your own home and you can join us, which is fantastic. So thank you for joining us. As always in Teams, there is a Q&A function, and please use that to submit any questions or comments, just to check in as we're going through. And either we'll be able to deal with these questions live this morning, or if not, then trust me, we will get round to them in due course and be able to respond to you. The beauty of the webinar is that we can, to that extent, at least be interactive. You're not watching telly this morning, you're part of us, and we hope you can use the Q&A function for that. So, what is God's call to us in the time of COVID? First of all, I want to introduce Michael Harvey. Michael will be known to a good number of you perhaps through the years. Michael, I consider a good friend. We've been working together in a number of ways for many years with the same concern, the same passion for the church and our land in these times. So Michael, we are delighted to have you with us. To get us going, Michael, let me say this. I think we've all become sort of amateur analysts in recent times, discerning what's going on one way or another. But I know that you do particularly give time to thinking deeply and reflecting. So maybe just begin by sharing with us, from your perspective, what do you see? What do you consider is happening across our land in these days?
Well, thank you, Martin, and really appreciate that first question. I think, never for me has there been a more important time for Christians to be in contact with those around them. I don't think, we could have even imagined we were going to be in such a place, even six or 7 months ago. Now, why do I say it's really important for Christians to be in contact? Well, I think we've had weeks of self-isolation, which have led to economic disruption, disappointment, anxiety, and lots of pressure, has impacted, our neighbours, our friends, and even within our families. And I think it's left many people, kind of with big questions, questions about life, questions about themselves, and questions about God. I think, many of us have, whether we're in the church or outside the church, have had a chance to really have a good think, during this lockdown. And maybe for some of us who were a bit workaholic-y, it's been tough to slow down. But we've discovered perhaps there's been more to life than increasing speed. And, I think being forced to stay still, we've now perhaps discovered, kind of the important, kind of things in life. And I think not only that within our societies, because, we've been encouraged to go out for our daily exercise as well. It's brought fresh eyes, to our neighbourhoods. People have been rediscovering, they didn't really discover the morning chorus of the birds, and how beautiful certain flowers and trees, were in their neighbourhoods. So people have slowed down in our society, and I think not only that, we're starting to hear now, kind of some six months or so in, that from some of the kind of the surveys that have been going on, that 1 in 4 people have experienced mental distress, and so not only has this been a time to slow down, it's been a time of real mental stress for a number of our people, across our communities. Also, I think, kind of maybe we've discovered that we've been figuratively wearing masks, that we're a different person, kind of in different, situations. Well, not only figuratively are we wearing masks now, we're literally wearing masks as well. But I think one of the key points for me coming out of this period of time is when the government announced or really popularised the phrase key workers, and in the early parts of the pandemic, we knew who the key workers were: the nurses, the doctors, the supermarket workers, the teachers. But I'm wondering now, now that we're at this stage of the pandemic, whether, if not, a million or so Christians are the key workers right at this moment in time, because I think people have got big questions, Martin.
Thank you, Michael. And much of that chimes with what I sense as well. But let me just ask you a little bit from the church perspective, rather than just a general analysis of society. You and I have chatted, and your sense is that we're at an absolutely in-between times for the church, maybe something of a crossroads. You want to spell out a little bit more about what you mean by that in-between time?
Yeah, it's Martin, thank you. Really important question, I think. Well, first of all, let's just kind of reflect. Probably in 7 days, we changed things from a church perspective that might have taken years and years to change. I mean, can you imagine, that we moved from the physical church to an online. Amazing, really, what was achieved in such a small period of time. So I think, just to kind of reflect, kind of on that. And I think also, to reflect on the fact that the church is a living organism, that, kind of, though our buildings, might have been shut, that actually kind of the church is still very much alive. And, we've seen, kind of the church, kind of coming from people's kitchens, from their living rooms, from, from all sorts of different kind of places in our communities, and taking this idea where two are gathered, in God's name, God is there right in the midst. And I think we've discovered, kind of the living organism, of the church. But I think, taking this idea that we are in between times, I think we as a church have got to realise that I think we're going to be living with COVID-19 for quite a while. We're not going to be eliminating it for the foreseeable future, and as we're already kind of experiencing these latter weeks, we're going to be having local spikes. We could be facing a resurgence in the autumn. Now clearly we've got to hope for the best, whilst planning kind of for the worst. But whatever happens, there's going to be a long-lasting effect of COVID. And I think I really like the phrase, which I think Rowan Williams coined. He called for a mixed economy, of church. And I like that phrase. And I think we're probably there at this moment in time, where there are going to be churches that are clearly going to meet physically, but perhaps without the singing. But there's going to be churches that are going to keep their online presence going, and maybe there's going to be a mix of both going on here. And so we are in these in-between times of trying to kind of discover, kind of during a pandemic, how are we a church? How are we church? I think for those who, kind of would love to approach church, there's a fear about entering buildings. I think there was a fear about entering buildings before we ever got near a pandemic. And so therefore is, for us as the church right now, as we enter the autumn period, is how do we help people approach Christianity, when our buildings may only be being used for services which perhaps don't have singing. How do we do that? We're really in between right now. And I think even the government have recognised, this fear which is out there about entering, kind of buildings, with the kind of the Eat Out to Help Out scheme. That was the government trying to encourage people, out of their homes again. And I'm going to be suggesting that for the church, we don't need an Eat Out to Help Out scheme. We need a Reach Out to Help Out scheme as we move into the autumn. So, for me, I think we're going to have the online church still going for the foreseeable future, as well as the physical church. And it's how do we kind of use that opportunity of being online and physical? We've got two opportunities here, Martin.
Michael, I love that phrase, reach out to help out. Do we get £10 off when we reach out? Who knows? But here's my question. Actually, right now, folks are totally caught up, rightly so in many ways, with the practicalities involved. We're trying to find out where the best source is for bulk buy of sanitizer. We're marking out our floors so we know where people will come into the building. marking out seats and pews. So we're organising volunteers who can do track and trace at the door. That is a headache. And as I've been speaking to ministers in recent days, I know that they are stressed out enough just with that, not just ministers, folks across our congregations. What I'm suggesting is, actually, maybe people have got enough on their plates just doing stuff and getting things back on the road without reaching out. Are you suggesting that reaching out is more of an imperative and actually not a luxury that we can consider to be put on the back burner for some other day?
Yeah, thanks, Martin. I think kind of for me, God, is constantly reaching out, and we have to take our lead, kind of from what we see and hear, the Spirit doing across our nation. And so, yes, there is clearly, lots of technical and practical work to do in order to actually open our buildings. But alongside that, we must not forget that God is calling to us. And I've been working over the past 6 months or so on something called Acorn, which is just this acknowledgement that if we kind of start with asking God what it is that God is wanting us to do, on a daily basis, then we might be surprised, that actually kind of we get a call to reach out, to our neighbour. And this which I've been practicing kind of with folks across Scotland over the past kind of month or so, I kind of call armchair mission, kind of something which, even if you were shielding, kind of that you could actually kind of do. And what people have really discovered by really slowing down and by really kind of asking God about who to connect with, they found a simple way of doing mission. And I call it a kind of a spiritual practice for such a time as this, a way to discover God, even when we're in our homes, in our living rooms. And so I think God is so active across our nation, honestly, really active. I think it would be a missed opportunity if we don't actually slow down and ask God the direction for our lives today, Martin.
Thank you, Michael. Now, you mentioned Acorn, and we're going to get very specific about Acorn in due course as a way, as a means, a vehicle for what you've been speaking about. But before we go there, just in case people are thinking, oh, here we go, another kind of theory in some book somewhere, I'm going to talk to Paul Harringman, who, Paul, delighted you could join us this morning. Paul is the mission development worker in the Presbytery of Inverness area. And here's the thing, Paul has been working with the Acorn programme that Michael's going to talk about. So in other words, we've got some lived experience of this programme in the room this morning. Paul, how did you hear about it? How did you get involved with it? And yeah, go on and tell us a wee bit how it's been working for you.
Thank you, Martin. Good morning. I met Michael for the first time back in October, November, when he was doing a road trip around Scotland, talking about becoming invitational church. And it was just deeply helpful. So since then, Michael and I have connected. Now, when we went into lockdown I had this big question in my mind. What can we do as a church? Beyond perhaps food banks, beyond the usual things that we want to do with services, how can we reach out when we are stuck? And it was Robbie Morrison who started our conversation actually this morning, who said, why don't you get in touch with Michael? So I phoned Michael, and Michael and I had some phone calls around asking God on a daily basis, who do you want me, Lord, to connect with? And the key is that the idea is that this is somebody beyond the church. And when we went into lockdown, we've decided to take that to the next level of saying, hey, let's not just ask God, but invite others in on this journey and do this journey together with Christians. Martin.
So the business of asking God, who might I contact? Maybe the Ethiopian who went by in his carriage this morning. So tell us in practice, how's that been going, Paul? Have you made any kind of progress in that endeavour?
Yes, indeed, we have. I'm just reminded of the story of Zacchaeus. Here's this guy that just doesn't seem to be liked for very obvious reasons. And I just wonder, if there would have been a faith community around him, would they have left this guy? Would they have ignored him because they just don't like what he's up to? And yet he is the one climbing a tree. He is the one whose heart is ready for a connection with Jesus. And that's been my experience, that there's been so many people out there who want to have a real conversation about what's happening on a deeper level. So what we have done is we have set up 3 Acorn groups. And these are kind of like reporting groups where people come back and share about what God has been doing. And it is really simple, and it is so encouraging to hear stories about the fact that God calls us. It's an incredible honor to realize that God doesn't just call the church, but he calls me to reach out to somebody. And what we do in these groups is we pretty much just do a wee circle where people can share their stories. And we just answer 2 simple questions. What is God doing in me? And what is God doing through me? And the helpful thing here, Martin, is that Acorn is not another church program. It is not like, let's try this and see where it might lead in the future. This is not about potential. This is not about opportunity. The real reason why I really like this program is that it moves us away from talking about stuff. We do a lot of talking in the church to doing it. And it moves it away from what God might be doing in the future if we do A, B, and C, to what is God actually doing in our lives just now, and what has he done? Furthermore, what I really like about this program is I've worked in the church for a long time, and a lot of the ministries are ministries that can be done by a few people, with experience in finance, or being able to work with teenagers, or helping out in a Sunday club. What this does is, as Michael said, it's an armchair ministry. It's everybody can do this. So this is an opportunity for the church at large to get involved. Martin.
Thank you, Paul. Your enthusiasm is great, and thank you for it. And we will come back. But I think, Michael, now we need to get to grips a little bit with Acorn. Okay, let's give the game away up front. It's an acronym, isn't it? Each of the letters standing for something. So it's about time we got to grips with it. So start unpacking Acorn for us, Michael, please.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. Yeah, the A of the Acorn is for ask, and it must, start there. It must start there. So sometimes, we do missional things without actually kind of asking God. I do feel at times that we've become event-led rather than God-led. So what would the daily ask look like? Well, I'm trying to get 100,000 Christians, across the UK, praying a daily prayer which goes like this: Lord, today, who do you want me to connect with outside of the church family? So, Lord, today, who do you want me to connect with outside of the church family? Now, this is kind of based on on something that Jesus said from in John, when he said, "I only do what I see the Father do. I only do what I see the Father do." There's no room for maneuver there, really, is there? No room for maneuver at all. Jesus seemed to be Father directed. So as followers of Jesus, therefore, I think this is a pretty good place, to start. Lord, today, who do you want me to connect with outside of the church family? So that's where it begins. But then the next letter of Acorn is the letter C, and that's for the call. That's for the call that God will call us back. Now, the thing is, it might not be immediate, might not be, right there and then that God calls us back as we prayed the prayer. It could be, later that day. It could be when we're out for our daily walk. It could be when, we're entering, the socially distanced office, that we're part of, but God, and it might not even be that day, it might be the day afterwards, so, but God will, call us back. And you know what? So sometimes that we need to do some work on that. Some of us kind of feel at times, well, God would never call me. And, the delight of the Acorn process is when people really discover a sense, that God has called them to actually go and do something, specific. And normally, just to kind of confirm with everybody, the call of God sometimes feels really scary. It's like, oh no, not that person, give me another. It's sometimes it's a little bit like that. That actually we don't really want to go to the person that we feel, that God is calling us to go to. But God will call, and that's one of the beautiful, kind of hidden things here. A spiritual food that God might well call us. So that's the second letter of Acorn. The third letter of Acorn is the letter O, and that is for obey. So we've got the ask, then we've got the call, then we've got the obey. So what do we do in the obey phrase? And let me kind of speak first of all for those of us who have been shielding, those of us who are in isolation, because we may think, oh, well, there's not a lot we can do, when, you can't physically, connect with people. Well, with the obey phrase, even for people who are shielding, we can just pick up our phone or pick up our video technology and simply dial the person that God has called us to connect with. And what do we say to the person? Well, here's the training for what we say to the person. It's, how are you? I'm really sorry. Can I just apologise? You know, kind of that is the training. I know it's appalling, everybody. It's really appalling, isn't it? How are you? But if God the Father in the book of Genesis, you know, the first chapters can say, "Where are you?" I think we can get away with "How are you?" And the reason I kind of give that question is because it comes from a missiologist called Vincent Donovan, who, so a studier of mission, basically, who wrote a book called Christianity Rediscovered. And he said, we make the mistake as Christians of thinking we're taking God with us into any given situation. Big mistake. God is already there. Our job is to find out what God is doing and join God in that conversation. So by simply asking the question, how are you? It opens up the possibility of discovering, you know, kind of something from the answer that somebody gives back. Now, listen, you know, I know what we're all like in the UK. We all know what the answer to the question, how are you, is, don't we? We all know. It's fine, isn't it? That's the answer to that question. But we need to reset the question. Yeah, you know, it's like, yeah, I know you're fine, but really, how are you? How are you? And what I've discovered from doing this process is that we find God in the ache, in the hurt that's often been wrapped around with a story that the folks who we're speaking to will then go on to tell us, that we find God somewhere within that. So Martin, ask, call, obey. You know, that's kind of core to the Acorn process.
Thanks, Michael. I'm with you so far. Ask that a daily prayer. Lord, who are you calling me to reach out to today? And then you gave us a starter for 10 questions. How are you? You were right, I think, in saying that the automatic answer to that is I'm fine. But let's imagine we go a little beyond that. In Scotland, the follow-up would be, that's some weather we've been having recently. So you've got that kind of almost idle chit chat. And then are there more specific questions you recommend, or at that point, are we sort of trusting God to take that conversation into perhaps deeper areas, either if not right then, maybe over a period of time?
Yeah. Martin, great question. And, you know, certainly I don't want to be too prescriptive at this time, you know, kind of, I think, you know, starting out with the question, how are you? And then, you know, kind of trying to listen, you know, there's been a big thing in Christianity about leadership, and rightly kind of so, you know, we want good Christian leaders. But I would say that we also need good Christian followers. You know, we're followers, and therefore, you know, kind of we're trying to listen carefully, you know, to the nudge and the call of God. And so, you know, within this process, I would suggest that when we're having a conversation with somebody who God has called us to have a conversation with, that God will give us little signals within that conversation. If we slow ourselves down, calm ourselves down a little. Jesus was a cracking question asker. You know, I think, I don't quite know the number, but he asked more questions in the Gospels than he was actually asked himself. I think it's something like 318. And I just wonder whether, you know, kind of one of the futures of mission and evangelism, if I may use that word, is becoming a great question asker. You know, to be able to kind of, Lord, you know, as I'm listening to this conversation, what is the next question? What's the next question? And so no, I don't want to be prescriptive, because every conversation will, kind of go in all sorts of different directions. But look, even if one comes out of a call with somebody, and you've had a lovely, conversation, it's half time. It's half time, it's not the end of the conversation. Maybe God will kind of say afterwards, or you'll get an impression afterwards as to what the next question is going to be. So I won't worry too much about leaving questions that have not been asked. There's always a next time, for that conversation, which could actually be kind of a prelude to the call to go back to that person. Martin.
I like that a lot, Michael, the idea of being good question askers. In a way, that kind of makes it a bit easier in my mind, because I guess traditional understandings of maybe reaching out to people, we get scared because we start to think, I don't know enough about this, or what would I say? And you're almost suggesting it's not so much what you're going to say, it's what you're going to ask, and then in that begin to trust God for what happens. I like that. Michael, before I go on, because listen, it's a long time since I left school and my spelling's not great, but ACO doesn't add up to Acorn, so I'm guessing there's other letters. But before we get there, let me just pick up on one of the questions that's been asked in the Q&A, which almost echoes a question I put to you, but I will reiterate it. The person's asking, given the workload involved in opening buildings and so on, why should we be focusing on this? Why should there be a priority given to reaching out? Are you almost suggesting that no panic, this isn't a program you've got to adopt, this is just something you're going to weave into the life you're living anyway? Am I right?
Yeah. Yes, Martin. I think this is a way of life. This is not a condiment, kind of a nice to have. Surely, as relationship Christians, where we say we have a relationship with God, to be setting off our day, kind of, Lord, direct me today. Lord, kind of point out today, the things that you need me to do. Lord, organize my agenda today, kind of, i.e. being, kind of centralized on a relationship, kind of with the Spirit is, I think, really, really, really important. Now, that is not to say, that actually kind of all of the, the jobs of opening up our church buildings aren't also important, kind of, that is not to say that at all. I think this is, I personally think it's a fundamental, kind of, our relationship with God is the fundamental, it is the foundation piece of everything, but it's not, kind of excluding anything else that's going on here. Martin.
Okay, so I'm going to ask the question. I'm going to begin my day. Lord, who would you have me reach out to? In that, I'm going to believe that God will be active and that will open doors of possibility. And then I'm going to be obedient to that and actually act on that sense that God gives me. And in a reach out, whether on the phone or somebody that I meet, a neighbour, I'm going to say, how are you doing? And I'm going to trust that God will be in that conversation and where it will go next. Okay, A, C, O. You better tell us about R and N.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. It's yeah, it clearly doesn't spell Acorn, ACO, does it? But anyway, let's go to the R. So the R of Acorn is report, And why I felt that this was really important is because we seem to have lost testimony, out of the life of the church somehow. Testimony has been kind of almost put to one side, or maybe kind of put to a special event, where apparently you've got to have a proper testimony, like a really proper testimony, not an ordinary, kind of testimony, but a real proper one. But I think we miss something if we're not, kind of reporting to one another as to what, God is actually kind of doing, on a day-to-day basis, both in us and through us. And so the idea that Paul was just talking about before is just the encouragement for no more than 6, but just a group of Christians, getting together to report back to one another, to tell each other the stories of what has been happening, as they've done this daily prayer. It's almost like, kind of, you need, kind of people alongside you, cheering you on, kind of that idea of cheering you on as you actually kind of answer, the call of God. So important. So the fourth element is report. And again, maybe before we close, that we could ask Paul one or two, kind of specific questions as to one or two stories, that have come out from these reports. Then the final element is N, which is to notice, to notice God. I found it really kind of fascinating as I've been helping to set these Acorn groups right across the UK, how so often God is not, kind of recognized in the story to begin with anyway, to begin with. We sort of kind of take over, kind of, and forget that God has called us, kind of, God was there right in the middle of the whole thing. And so as Paul said before, there's two questions we ask one another in a kind of an Acorn group is, what is God doing in me? And what was God doing through me to the other person? Now, you might kind of think, well, how do you mean, what is God doing in me? And I want to kind of make this, kind of this my view known. I think we've made a terrible mistake in mission and evangelism by thinking it's only about the person God is sending us to. I think that's a horrendous error, a catastrophic error, for Christianity. In fact, when God, or let's say when Jesus was on mission, he took his disciples with him. Kind of, they were being discipled on mission. And I think the separation that we've done of mission and discipleship, as if they are two different things, we have to bring them back together again. And I think within this process, by asking the question, what has God been doing in me? Now, one of the things that God could be doing in us, as an example, is, showing, that we're fearful, and it's okay. It's absolutely okay for God, to kind of just pull out of us, an area in our life that we might be kind of scared, or we might discover that actually we can hear the call of God. What is God doing in me? And then what is God doing through me to another person? Honestly, we've had some thrilling stories, coming out of this, really kind of thrilling. But each story is different, and the process just allows a flexibility, to kind of come through. Martin.
Let me go to Paul then and just pick this up. Michael, you've talked about our reporting. In other words, the possibility of a small group of people, Christians, who might share with one another. How's that going for you? Paul, you have got some of those groups going up in Inverness. Would you say they are desirable or sort of essential to the process?
I would dare to say that that they're quite essential, Martin. And the reason is in these conversations we have, and we usually meet kind of like once a fortnight with a group, is that often I don't really realize what God is doing here, but it's the others on the phone call that bring that out. And that is the wonderful thing. Very often, many of us actually feel like failures because we feel like God is not clearly spoken, or actually the conversation didn't go as we wanted because we were not able to really explain our faith in that conversation. But maybe that has not been the point. Can I share one or two stories? Yeah? Okay. So an interesting story was this: just as we were getting out of lockdown, as it was easing, one of our ladies decided not to phone somebody as she had been doing, but she believed God put a name in her lap, and she decided to visit them. And the lady opened the door with the biggest beaming smile ever. And as she was invited in, it turned out that it was her birthday. And she was the only one visiting this lady that day. How good is God? I've got a story of a lady who usually visits her neighbor on a Thursday. And she's been doing this, deliberately believing that God is in this situation. And one Thursday she couldn't make it. And she had little time, but she has got such a big pastoral heart that she was like, I'm not going to cut this short. She actually decided to come on the Friday morning rather than the Thursday afternoon. And the lady opened the door and said, oh, thank you so much, you're here. And over the next wee while, she just shared stories of all the horrible things that had happened just that morning. And she very much welcomed prayer. The other thing that's been happening is one of the gents in one of our groups, he keeps saying, I keep asking God, who would you like me to connect with? But on the day, people start connecting with him. Non-Christian friends, people he's worked with in the past, people who've just got questions and want to talk about life. And there's one story of a lady who keeps now going into Tesco's and keeps on meeting person after person who wants to have a deep conversation about stuff. So these Tesco trips have moved on from a 10-minute in and out to well over an hour. And she shared one story where she was going to invite somebody into Acorn. She was loving this group so much and the stuff that we share, and found it so helpful that she thought, oh, I know somebody who I'm going to ask. So she decided to knock on the door. She knocked on the door and a man opened the door, but it wasn't who she expected because she knocked on the wrong door. Now, this guy said, I am so happy to see you, because she had actually taken a funeral service for a family member of his. And he was struggling with other things, and he said, for so long I've tried to get in touch with you and I haven't done so, so thank you for being here. So very strongly we feel that God is at work in people's lives and he's doing things, and it's like Jesus recognizing with Zacchaeus that God is doing something here, and kind of like moving that story along. And to do that together is very helpful.
Paul, thank you for that. It sounds to me that those groups are actually places of encouragement, because I guess I had the idea that maybe they would be groups where I would get a row. Maybe I would say, guys, I just didn't get round to it today, and people were going to beat up on me. But you're suggesting actually it's different from that, and it's very real, but actually encouraging when you begin to share stories of stuff happening. Michael, a couple more questions coming in the chat, which I want to put to you. You used the phrase that we might find God in the ache of life. And the questioner's wondering, what if a person begins to open up in that department and describe what they've been feeling maybe as the absence of God completely, in the ache, and just not thinking there's anything there? In your experience, how would you go about responding when somebody comes back with that kind of response to your open question?
Yes, it's a really good question, and here's the thing, kind of for somebody to say that, within a conversation, and for us to respond, well, listen, I was praying, this morning, Lord, today, who do you want me to connect with, outside of the church family? And I've turned up on your doorstep, or I dialed you, God must, kind of love you so much, that, I've been sent, kind of into, this situation. And so, talk to me, what's happened, kind of tell me the place in your life that you haven't, experienced God, because maybe God is wanting me to hear this. And, so something along those lines, there's a spiritual, kind of transaction going on. I often kind of feel as if God is running a call center, and he's calling us, to, nudging us, prompting us to kind of go to places, where he's already having a conversation with people, but we're so busy, that sometimes we don't answer the call of God. And but so in this situation, I would suggest, well, God is clearly, kind of in action by sending you into that situation. And here's the lovely idea: Christ in you, the hope of glory. Christ in you, just your presence in there has brought that question out. Let's not be afraid of questions. Let's not be afraid of questions. Kind of sometimes there are no, kind of immediate answers to questions, but maybe they deepen, the question. Martin.
Thanks, Michael. And I like the way, again, you took it back to questions, maybe ultimately asking that person, so what is it going on right now? That's quite different from dropping on someone a theology of suffering or a theology of the absent God, where it's all about us having the answers to people. That's quite a different dynamic, isn't it, to the questions that we can continue to ask. And Ben's got a really good question here, and I think this is very real for a lot of people. Ben's asking, how do we challenge people when actually they really don't have any contacts out with the church circle? And that can become the way of it. I've got the Kirk session on Monday nights. I help out at Boys Brigade on Tuesday nights. I've got my Bible study Wednesday night, prayer meeting Thursday night. I go to the guild. I've got worship to organise for Sunday. I've got no time for other people out with the church. That's quite a challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely a challenge. But again, here's the point of this process, is that sometimes it gets people to realise that their contacts which they have, that they've almost ghettoized, themselves. But let me just tell you a story from an Acorn group, which might just kind of illuminate the point, kind of, which is such a good question, and it's such an honest, kind of question, and the process kind of deals with that. I was dealing with somebody who said exactly the same thing, and on the first week that we met as an Acorn group, he said, "Look, there isn't anybody, I can almost assure you, Michael, there's nobody, whatsoever. It's all right, just keep praying the prayer. Lord, today, is there somebody God is nudging you, to connect with? Anyway, came back on the second week, and my heart dropped because there was still nobody. My heart was dropping, but I was calm, kind of on the surface, everything was calm, but I said, right, just continue to pray the prayer. Lord, today, is there somebody God was wishing you to connect with? Anyway, in week 3, he was beaming in week 3, absolutely beaming. And he told us that, the following story. He said, all of a sudden, somebody who I worked with 7 years ago suddenly kind of came into my mind. Couldn't get this person, out of my mind at all. Didn't even have, the phone number, of this person. Well, I did a little bit of research, and eventually I found, the phone number and phoned the person up. And the person said, oh, thank you ever so much for calling me. I've not spoken to anybody for 3 weeks. My next door neighbour died 2 or 3 days, ago. Thank you ever so much for calling. I mean, blooming heck, absolutely, incredible. And that's why, don't worry, kind of if, one's list, there isn't anybody in one's list. This is not about making up anything. This is about actually asking God, allowing God, to infuse our hearts and minds, kind of with somebody. And don't worry about it, God will do something, in the situation, but calm. Martin.
Aileen, one of our participants this morning, she offers something into this which I think is quite helpful, and it's to do with what both you and Paul have been speaking about. She is part of an Acorn group, and she says that what folks are finding is that those encounters are actually just coming about as part of normal day-to-day stuff. In other words, this isn't extra activities that you've got to add into an already busy diary. It's just kind of there already. I think Paul's going to add something to that. And Aileen, maybe this takes us back to the end, at the end of Acorn. Notice she's suggesting that it's sometimes maybe after the conversation and after that encounter that we do notice, wow, that was something happened there. Yeah, so Paul, does that chime with you that this might just be part of everyday life?
Very, very much so, Martin. And I think also going back to the earlier question about shouldn't we be focusing on opening a church? Is that not what we should be doing? Somebody in our Acorn group shared a Bible passage which completely threw me. We went to Nehemiah Chapter 3, and this chapter is full of names, of very difficult names of people building the wall of Jerusalem. And then the person said, well, that's Acorn, isn't it? And I was like completely, I didn't know what to say. I was like, I've got no idea. And then she said, well, look at this. Here is somebody who's a goldsmith. There's perfume makers. There's a priest. There's a temple servant. And so many others, rulers and half rulers, and they all build the wall together. And the great thing is that I think this is what Acorn does. We've still all got our jobs and our functions. But we are key workers. We are wall builders. We can help bring people in touch with God. And the idea is that, these are often not conversion conversations where somebody just says, oh, you've convinced me now, I'm coming to faith. Not at all. But what happens is they keep on moving closer with God, and they recognize that they are journeying with God, and people start asking for prayers. And it's something called the Engel Scale. It's really worthwhile finding this on the internet. It's Engel, Engel. And he writes about, recognizing in people's lives that God is moving with them. And there's one more thing I really want to say, Martin. For me personally, what this has done, because I feel that God has asked me to reach out to my neighbour across the road, to my cousin abroad, and to others. And what this has done for me, it's not been a program, but it has really established these relationships more than I could ever dream. And it is not me trying to help them get to know God. That might be the intention and the deeper wish. But the relationships in itself are so worthwhile, and trust will be a bridge to truth.
Thank you, Paul. It's so helpful again hearing you and your lived experience of working through Acorn. Michael, Gillian's asking a question here and really suggesting that people might just say, well, it's just a coincidence. Just a coincidence I met that person in Tesco or wherever it might be. I mean, is that okay? Or do we need to begin to encourage people to see that in the coincidences, God is actually at work? Michael?
Yeah, I think that's how definitely many people come, to Acorn, and especially kind of, once we set the process up in week 2, people normally start their story with, well, nothing really happened. Nothing really happened, but by the time they've told their story to the rest of the group, all of a sudden the rest of the group have found God right in the middle of the story, and so this is why I'm suggesting kind of that question, what is God doing in me? Well, sometimes we need other people to tell us kind of what God is doing in us, because we're too close to the situation to actually kind of find what God is actually kind of doing. But yeah, I mean, I think what Acorn, one of the things it does is it brings fresh eyes, so that we can see, kind of for the first time, that God is not only just kind of worked in this one situation, but in fact, God has been working across our lives in so many different situations. If God has worked in this particular story, how has God been working in the past in different things? It gets you to kind of reevaluate, so you move from coincidence to God incidence. And once you start hearing other people's stories, I mean, it's ridiculous, it's absolutely ridiculous. The things that we go through to get us to a particular situation, in science, there's this thing called fine tuning, kind of the fact that the sun is exactly the right distance away, kind of from the earth. And what you find in this process is that God fine tunes things, so that we can actually know that God is with us. Martin.
Thank you, Michael. I'm going in a moment come to a question that's been asked by Lorna, but just before I go there, Paul was suggesting the gradualness of the process, in as much as, it might not be today. You're not offering something here that's a kind of instant fix or something like that. You're not suggesting that we take up Acorn and 6 months later we won't be able to cram everybody into church. There'll be so many people. You're talking about something that's more gradual, and it's actually about our life just beginning to be adapted to the process, and that as we ourselves are taking up and changing, that gradually we may begin to see some fruit from this. So am I right? This isn't a kind of a quick fix solution here, is it?
Yeah, I suppose I thought I was brought up on John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, or kind of you could look at Tolkien, who the Catholic writer Tolkien, who wrote Lord of the Rings, and you see this kind of the idea that actually there's a gradual growing in one's relationship with God as you go through different kind of elements, within your life. And so I would say that actually, whilst we have the Damascus Road, kind of as an idea of how somebody comes to faith, perhaps there are other roads, like the Emmaus Road, where there's this gradual, kind of unpacking of things going on, or kind of this is more woman at the well, in terms of mission, where Jesus asks a number of questions to kind of get to the truth. It wasn't one question and wham bam, etc. There was a series of questions here. So I think gradual may be looked down upon as being not very good at all, because we want immediate, in our generation. But actually, gradual often means that you've secured something, and then you've secured something else, then you've secured something else, rather than a one-off, kind of thing. So in praise of gradual, I would say, Martin.
Thanks, Michael. In praise of gradual, I'm going to remember that for today. Paul, did you just want to chip in something additional to this point? And then I promise I will go to Lorna's question after that. First of all, Paul.
Yeah, I agree with Michael that it is gradual. But imagine it is not just one or two conversations with one or two people. Imagine this is lots and lots and lots of conversations. And that will then feed into people's minds and psyche when they see an announcement on a church wall, or when they get invited to Messy Church, or when somebody says, want to come to our church coffee morning, that their hearts might already be further open. So I think it is not a one or the other. It grows the landscape. And I think, in the church, we talk about mission a lot. I read it in all kinds of papers. I hear it a lot. But my question is, how much are we doing it, really? And this exercise, it is quite challenging. But the great thing is, quite often, I'm online with a group and I'm like, I haven't got much to share. But there will always be one who's got this amazing story of what God has done. And it's nearly always a different person every time. And we get this ownership of what God is doing among us. And one lady in one of our groups, it has just put her on fire so much. She's been calling it pester power. And she says, I will ask God at breakfast. I will ask him in the shower. I will ask him at lunchtime. I will ask him when I'm walking. Who do you want me to connect with? And when we get that kind of fire, we get all kinds of missional expressions growing among us.
Thank you, Paul. There's another takeaway for me. Pester power relates very well to one of our New Testament accounts, doesn't it? The woman just banging on the door, refusing to go away until she gets justice. Paul, Michael, Lorna, I think, has got a brilliant point here. She points out that during lockdown, we've actually had plenty of opportunity to keep working with relationships on the fuzzy edges, as she calls it, of church, maybe through Messy Church and so on. She relates her experience of going amongst the community with Messy Church bags and so on. And she does say that before she does that kind of activity, she always really pretty fearful about it. But after it, she feels great. And she's pondering whether that's because she's just scared that people won't want to engage, or she asks, might it be something more? And she puts it this way, might there actually be a force that doesn't want this stuff to happen? Now that takes it in a kind of deep area. Michael, do you want to make a response to Lorna's point?
Great question. Really, really great question. And I think this comes to the heart of why we don't do mission. If you really kind of think through kind of why we don't kind of reach out. I think, as Lorna has kind of identified, that before the missional activity, there's often a feeling of fear. Although, by the way, after coming into Scotland so many years now, the word that Scots generally use is reticent. I pay myself £5 every time I hear the word reticent in Scotland. I'm very rich, very, very rich indeed. We have got so many different words for fear, concern. I'm really concerned about that. I'm really worried. Really anxious. We've got so many different words. But here's the thing. Could it not be, folks, that when God calls us to do something into mission, that our first feeling is could it not be fear? Now, look at our Bible stories. Surely, which of the saints in Scripture, when called by God, actually wanted to go and do the thing? I love the story of Ananias. Ananias has to be told 3 times. He's told in a dream, he's told in a vision, then he's commanded, off you go, Ananias. And then Ananias says, to God, hang on a second, don't you know Saul's reputation? Sounds like fear, to me. And honestly, folks, this is the thing, that when we come to the missional, moment, there could be the feeling of fear. There was a guy many years ago wrote a book called Moments of Truth. He founded an airline called SAS, I think Scandinavian Airlines. And so he wrote this book, Moment of Truth, and he said that in building this airline, he knew that there were moments of truth which would make the difference between them being a brilliant airline and other airlines. Moments of truth. And I think also in the missional kind of process, there are also moments of truth. I am not of the school that all we need to be is confident. I am not of that school of mission. Plenty of missioners say all we need is confidence. That's all we need. I am not of that school at all. What I am of the school of is that when God calls us, it might not feel that great. But here's the other point that Lorna made is once we take a step of faith into our fear, oh my goodness, it makes you feel so good. Once we've actually taken a step of faith into our fear. And I'm hypothesizing, which means I don't know whether what I'm about to say is complete heresy, but I honestly kind of wonder whether kind of the fruits of the Spirit are on the other side of fear. Can you have peace, real peace, without facing, that which you are fearful about? Can you really experience joy? I mean, this is the thing. I've found that the more scared you are, the more ecstatic joy there is on the other side of taking a step of faith. And I think this is a real transformation moment in modern Christianity, that if we can really understand it's okay to feel afraid, in fact, it may well be the presence of God, that actually on the other side of it is incredible stuff. Martin.
Thanks, Michael. That was powerful. On the far side of fear, we've got to go through it rather than avoid it, maybe. But listen, this is all very well for the likes of you and me, and Paul seems like a kind of outgoing guy too. And I was on holiday recently, and I just walked right up to this woman that I saw and started chatting with her. We were on the Outer Hebrides, and I wanted to talk about the Gaelic language. It turned out she was from Yorkshire, but anyway. I'd no problem about just marching right up and speaking to a complete stranger. But maybe Acorn should have a little strapline. Introverts need not apply. Because there's a bunch of people that I just don't, I'm just not comfortable picking the phone up to somebody, or, it might be okay for some, but this isn't for me. How would you respond to that?
And Martin, I would honestly kind of say this is mission for introverts. Oh my, because really, all you got to do is, the training is how are you? That's it. There's the training. How are you? So simple as that. And then what introverts are really, really good at is asking questions, because they don't want to do any talking. And again, the rediscovery that Jesus asked more questions than he was actually kind of asked himself. That must be, something that we need to reflect upon. So I think introverts have the best questions, really, because they really like other people talking rather than them having to do the talking. So maybe we do need to kind of develop what would be the next question. Maybe we do need to role play, these things. But I don't want to get too prescriptive about it. But this is great for introverts, and I know Paul probably has got something to say about this as well.
Yeah, I'm going to come to questions from Jenny and Debbie in a moment, but Paul, you're just going to add something to this business about introvert, extrovert, and so on.
Yes, very much so. Acorn is based on the question, Lord, who do you want me to connect with? So if God points out a person, somehow we need to believe that he is connecting with them as well. So we are not, this is not about me. I don't have the prime role here, but God has. So for starters, we don't start in our power, but in God's power. And we don't come out all guns blazing with all the stuff that we might be able to do or produce. In my experience, it has been the opposite. And it has pretty much been the ones who have been more introvert, who have come out with the bigger stories and have just been so amazed. There's one lady, she started Acorn on a Thursday evening. So she asked God on a Friday, who would you like me to connect with? Nobody came to mind. On a Saturday, she said, Lord, who would you like me to connect with? And nobody came to mind. And on the Sunday, she thought, it's a Sunday. I'm not going to ask God today. I'll come back to this tomorrow. Well, guess what? On Sunday afternoon, she got a phone call from somebody that she hadn't spoken to for a long time. And this was a mother who had had children in a holiday club years and years ago. And she was contemplating taking her own life. And out of all the people she could have phoned, she phoned this lovely introvert lady. And they were able to have a really good conversation and a prayer. And God is at work. So this is not for the few, this is for the many.
Thank you, Paul. It's really poignant and powerful account. Debbie is asking this, Michael, I'll direct it to you. She acknowledges that even when you begin to use language like mission and evangelism, then you better open that back door, because everybody's running out. We're scared off by the very language. So how do we get past the language when we're introducing Acorn and these kind of ideas?
Great question, Debbie. Yeah, I have to say I'm always kind of reticent. Yeah, there's my Scottish fear coming out, of using the word evangelism. I always have to kind of say to people, now I'm going to use this word now. Everybody kind of be calm, sit down, evangelism, is everybody still okay now? I get it. I absolutely kind of get it. But what I want to kind of suggest is that, this is such a simple process, because, all we're basically kind of saying here is that we get to ask people the question, how are you? And then we allow God, some room for maneuver, within that situation. And so Acorn groups are there, so that we can grow, in our relationship with God. but we grow in our relationship with God by actually kind of connecting with other people. So yeah, sometimes, words, lose, kind of their meaning and become scary. All I can say is that if we, I know kind of Robbie and Paul have put together a series of videos of people who've been in Acorn groups, and maybe that's kind of what will help people see that actually it's been a beautiful experience kind of for them, and maybe we just need to tell some testimonies, some reports about that. Martin.
Thanks, Michael. Jenny asks a question, Michael, that I'm not sure you'll be able to do full justice to today. You may just be able to point to an answer. She's aware that you are also concerned with the whole question of health and healing. I heard your lecture last year to that end, and it was so interesting. It's an hour's worth of material minimum, but she's asking if there are any joining the dot connections between the health and healing concern and the Acorn project. Maybe you could just give us a snippet of an answer to this.
Yes. Yes. So for those of you who would like to actually have a look at the lecture I did last year, if you look at the Guild of Health and St. Raphael website and Dennis Duncan lecture, you'll find a hypothesis that I kind of make on the connection in mission on healing. Precisely, I would say Acorn is a way of life. It brings life. I have something else which is a way to life. But what I've seen is that, why I ask that question, what is God doing in you? Could not the missional process be a healing process, for those going on a mission? That there can be transformation for us, that actually kind of, as I said before, our fears, which we may not be aware of, that God, almost like a kind of, here's another way of kind of putting it. Let's say you've got a fear of spiders. What they've discovered now is, kind of gradually, if you, kind of, if you go to a psychologist, they'll put a little spider in the middle, in the palm of your hands, and then they'll put a next size up, then the next size up, then the next size up, until, your spider phobia is no longer there. I do wonder at times in mission, kind of, does God allow us to replay over and over again the areas that we're almost kind of, imprisoned in, so, fear makes us, kind of live a limited life. When Jabez says, expand my borders, could it not be that actually God is healing us as we go in mission? And so, again, just like we've separated mission and discipleship, could we not also have separated it from healing as well? That actually kind of mission is a healing thing. Henry Nouwen came up with the idea of the wounded healer. The wounded healer. If I was to write another book, it would be called The Wounded Inviter or The Wounded Connector. That God sends wounded people to other wounded people, and by his wounds we are healed, and by our wounds other people may well be healed. So I honestly kind of think we've got to rediscover mission as a healing journey. But thank you for the question, Jenny, really important.
Paul, I'm just going to give you a wee moment to respond to that as well, and then I think I will begin to draw the threads together. Folks, my experience has generally been that much beyond 90 minutes in an online format like this becomes challenging for us to all stay focused. So we will begin to wrap the threads up here. Paul, just a final thought on that subject.
Thank you, Martin. I was just wanting to ask Michael a question. and it's something that he shared with our groups quite a bit. Michael, can you explain to us, because I think it's very helpful in this conversation, the difference between successful and faithful?
Thank you, Paul. I think one of the barriers, apart from fear being a barrier in this process, the idea of the difference between the philosophy of success and the philosophy of faithfulness. We've all been brought up in a kind of a generation that is all about hitting targets, kind of black or white, right or wrong, no grey, whatsoever. So we can often feel like we're either a success or more often we're a failure. It's either one or t'other. Whereas in Christianity, that is not a philosophy. Success and failure is not a philosophy. Faithfulness is the key philosophy in Christianity. And so, it doesn't say in the Bible, well done, good and successful servant. It doesn't say that. It says, well done, good and faithful servant. So when we actually kind of enter this process, this is one of the areas that we work on. Sometimes, we as a Acorn group have to say to somebody, oh my goodness, you've been so faithful there because you've answered the call of God. You've done that which God called you to do. Oh yes, somebody didn't immediately get on their knees and give their life to Jesus right at this moment. Success, apparently. But you did that which God called you to do. Well done, good and faithful servant. And sometimes the other thing I would say is that sometimes people say that that success, that means, oh well, I can just be faithful and get away with things, etc. That it doesn't mean that at all. In business, if you don't think something's going to succeed, you don't try. In Christianity, when God calls you to do something that you don't think is going to succeed, you take a step of faith. It's a much stronger concept. It's a much stronger concept because we allow God to do with our acts of obedience that which God wants to do. Paul, thank you for the question. Martin.
Thank you, Michael. Earlier, the question was about the link with health and healing, and Paul was really helpful. He put up the link to Michael's lecture that was referred to in the Q&A, so you can grab that, folks, if you want to do that. Michael, as we wrap things up, I'm hoping that folk will have found this morning helpful, but here's my prediction. By 5 p.m. tomorrow, we've pretty well forgotten about it, because life's going to come around, the kids will come home from school screaming about something. There'll be an issue, here or there. I'm going to be really busy between now and then. And any thoughts of Acorn groups and what was that question I'm supposed to ask in my morning prayers? It's just going to be squeezed out. And we know that often happens with conferences, webinars. It's really good ideas, and then we move on. What's your hope for this across the UK? And yeah, how do we avoid that I've just described as a worst case possibility, that we just all forget about it?
Yeah, thank you, Martin. My hope, across the UK is for 100,000 Christians to be praying that daily prayer, Lord, today, who do you want me to connect with outside of the church family? So across the UK, that's my hope. I think for the Church of Scotland, I would like to see set up in every presbytery at least an Acorn group, at least one Acorn group, because once you set up one, it sort of multiplies, so if we can just kind of get a somebody in a presbytery who will start to work on this, and certainly kind of myself, Robbie, and Paul, we're all would be happy to work alongside someone to be able to set this up. My other kind of hope and dream is that as a result of Acorn groups, is that Christians start to grow, in their relationship with God as they go through more and more experiences, that their confidence starts to grow, that it's not a coincidence anymore, it's a God incidence, and that by meeting together and testifying in Acorn groups, that we encourage one another, and as a result of that more people across Scotland come to know the Lord Jesus Christ, because as we started this webinar, we were talking about the big questions which are out there at this moment in time. In autumn, that is a time when acorns fall to the ground. In autumn, that's when they start to fall, and you'll see as you walk along the forest paths now, thousands of acorns, and some of those are going to kind of plant themselves in the ground, and by spring oak saplings will start to emerge. There's so much potential by just doing an act of obedience, incredible potential. But you see, even if that acorn never ever turns into an oak sapling, acorns produce are there as rich food resource for the ecosystem, and so is obedience. It is a rich food resource, and so this process is about what God is doing in us and through us. And so my hope is that those listening to this call, and I know we're going to send a follow-up to everybody, please would you consider working alongside myself, Robbie, and Paul to set up an Acorn group in your area, so that we can start to multiply this out. Martin.
Thank you, Michael. What a beautiful picture of the acorns dropping in the autumn, and in the spring, perhaps some new oak tree saplings. Michael, I guess what I love about this programme is that it's so simple, really. We don't need anybody from, moderator, presbytery clerk. We don't need permission as such to do this. This could just be some friends, some Christian friends who just go ahead and just get this thing going. So, we don't need months of meetings to go about it, really. With a little bit of enthusiasm from one or two people, we could be up and running. And might I just say to those that are in the call this morning who have joined this webinar, might this just be a means through which God will work at this time across Scotland? I mean, it may not be a magic wand, but is it a means that God will work through? Michael encouraged the asking of questions, and I'm finishing by asking that question. Might it be that you're going to do something with this? So again, as Michael alluded to, we will offer a follow-up email to this and more, just to encourage, and let's see what can positively come from our webinar this morning. I want to thank Robbie for the initiation, for Diane, who's in the back room, just keeping things ticking over technically. I want to thank Michael, of course, whose initiative it is and who is so passionate about this for the UK and for Scotland today. And I want to thank Paul, who came along and shared his actual experience of running Acorn groups. And maybe with that in mind, Paul, would you be willing just to close our session today by praying for the church, for Scotland at this time? Paul.
Let's pray. Lord, thank you that you are active. Lord, thank you that you love the people of Scotland and you love them so much that you died for them. Lord, thank you for calling the church and calling Christians into a journey with you that stretches beyond ourselves. Lord, to be people of blessings, to be people who see the fruit of the Holy Spirit established in our lives and in the lives of those that you touch. Father, I was reminded this morning of a verse in Acts 4, verse 13, and it's about Peter and John, and it's recognized that people see that they are unschooled and ordinary men. But then the people are astonished because they took note that they have been with Jesus. So, Lord, we pray that we might learn this new spiritual exercise to be with you every day, and will you reactivate the church missionally? Will you set our hearts on fire so we can see many acorns dropping into the ground here and there and everywhere and dying? So there's new life sprouting up of people who will turn around and say, Lord, thank you so much for what you've done in my lives. Thank you so much that I am worthy. Lord, that you have given your life for me. And Lord, thank you that it started with that question, how I was doing. Dear Jesus, we give you all the glory, and we want to thank you for us being allowed to be your church. Amen.
Thank you, Paul, so much. Okay, here's the deal. Tomorrow morning over my granola breakfast, I'm going to pray that prayer. Lord, who today do you want me to connect with? And let's see where that begins to go. Are you with me? You're going to pray that prayer? Let's just see where this goes. Friends, thank you for joining us in today's webinar. Go in peace. Thank you.